You walk through the golden gates into what can only be described as the beating heart of Christendem's grandeur. Polished marble stretches out beneath your feet, catching the flickering glow of countless candles, turning the floor into a shimmering pool of light. The walls are dressed in exotic tapestries, each one a whisper from distant empires, each thread soaked in the riches of conquest and trade. Ladies drift past like whispers, their gowns of silk brushing the air, their fingers trailing along furniture worth more than cities. The air itself hums with a strange electricity, thick with centuries of secrets, heavy with the perfume of roses. An amber grease, vibrating with the charge of absolute unquestioned power. This you think is the dream, the story book brought to life. A world of elegance and power, of glittering crowns and velvet whispers. You take a deep breath to absorb the majesty. And then it hits you. The smell, a cloying sweetness, the heavy scent of perfume. But beneath it, something else. Something raw and sour. Your nose burns. Your eyes water. Suddenly, the fantasy shudders. The illusion cracks. This isn't the spotless realm of fairy tales, or the romantic elegance of period films. This is the actual court of medieval and Renaissance royalty. And behind the jewels, beneath the silks, lies a world of filth that would horrify the modern soul. The noble woman gliding toward you in her embroidered brocade, sleeves dripping with pearls the size of doves' eggs. She hasn't bathed in weeks, maybe months. The elegant man bending into a perfect bow commands armies and advises kings, and carries enough lice on his body to start a colony. And the lady in waiting at his side, she's holding her breath because the queen's exhale could knock out a warhorse. Welcome to the real royal court where power was divine but soap was optional. Where being chosen by God meant never having to apologize for your smell, and where cleanliness is next to godliness wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous. Heresy. This was a world where queens lived in filth worse than the poorest shelters of today. Where beauty routines killed slowly, and where elegance came at the cost of suffering few of us can imagine. But before we delve into the grime-soaked truth of royal life, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And leave a comment. Where are you watching from? It's surreal to think we're unearthing these hidden corners of history together. From across the world, bound by our curiosity for what's been forgotten. 1. The monthly bath ritual. 1. The monthly bath ritual. It's the year 1580. You're a servant at Queen Elizabeth I's court. Dawn creeps over the spires of Greenwich Palace, and you've drawn the short straw. Prepare. Her Majesty's bath. Yes, monthly. The most powerful woman in the known world. Ruler of an empire, bathed once a month. And even that was seen as pushing medical limits. Doctors warned that bathing too often might open the skin to disease. Once a month was borderline reckless. By firelight, 20 servants begin hauling water, bucket after bucket, from the kitchens, upstairs cases, through chambers. They fill a wooden tub, rough on the outside, but lined inside with Fine linen because the queen's skin must not be touched by splinters. And then the real nightmare begins. Elizabeth didn't remove her makeup daily. In fact, she didn't remove it at all. She used Venetian cerise, a skin whitening paste made of vinegar and white lead. She wore it every day, and every new layer went on top of the last. So, as you help the queen undress, what you see isn't skin, it's a crust. Her face is a cracked mosaic, flaking white paint, peeling like old wallpaper. When she lowers herself into the warm water, the effect is immediate. The bath turns cloudy. Swirls of sweat, grime, and lead-based paste slew off in ribbons. The scent hits next, a reeking mix of metal, vinegar, and months-old body odor. You stand beside the tub. Eyes stinging, stomach turning as gray. Flecks of dead skin and flakes of poison float by. The queen stares ahead. 2. The death mask of beauty. Serene, as if this is all completely normal. Because to her, it is too. The death mask of beauty. Step into Elizabeth's private quarters. Look closely. That pale ghostly face isn't just painted. It's a mask. A slow working poison. Every day, new lead-based Susie is applied right over the old. No washing, no cleansing, just fresh paste. Layered top whatever toxins still clung. From yesterday, last week, last month. Washing the face, dangerous. Opening pores, risky. And so the mask thickens. The effects were devastating. The lead seeps in day after day, year after year. It poisons the blood. It disrupts the mind. Courtiers began whispering about the queen's mood swings. How she forgot names mid-con conversation. How she would snap into rages with no warning. They blamed the burden of rule. They never guessed her face paint was eating her brain. The scent alone was its own punishment. Lead has a metallic bite. Mixed with sweat and vinegar and old oils, it turned conversation with the queen into an endurance test. Courtiers learned to breathe shallowly. To position themselves just so far enough to avoid the worst of her breath. Close enough not to appear rude. But the horror wasn't just physical. It was psychological. Lead poisoning warped the mind. It made queens paranoid, forgetful, prone to despair. And yet, each symptom demanded more cover, more paint, thicker masks, heavier wigs to hide the hair loss, stronger perfume to hide the breath. The cycle fed itself. Damage begot disguise. Disguise deepened the damage. The queens became ghosts, haunted by beauty, trapped by vanity, and slowly rotting behind a painted lie. 3a court crawling with lice. Court crawling with lice. Let's talk about lice. King James I of England famously refused to bathe. His presence turned entire rooms into hives of infestation. But this wasn't just a personal quirk. It was a court-wide epidemic. Lady Anne Clifford once visited his chamber. She wrote afterward that she and her entire entourage left lousy. In other words, they left crawling with lice. Imagine sitting in an opulent chair. Beside the king. At first, a light tickle on your neck. Then another. Soon your entire body feels like it's moving because it is. Lice from the king's furniture, the tapestries, the very air have made their way onto you. And now they've set up camp. But lice weren't just itchy. They were deadly. These parasites spread typhus, a disease that wiped out entire armies. And the palace, it was a perfect breeding ground. James wore the same clothes for months. Slept in them, rarely removed his hat. Parasites thrived in every seam and fold. Royal chambers became insect zoos. Dark corners writhed with bugs. Furniture pulsed with hidden life. And yet, the show went on. Ceremonies continued. Diplomacy was conducted. Treaties were signed. All while the elite battled armies of insects beneath their gowns and wigs. Fashion didn't help. Women's towering hairstyles sculpted with bare fat and dusted with powder created perfect nests for parasites. The grease lured them. The warmth kept them. And with no washing to dislodge them, they stayed. Some women carried long jeweled scratching sticks to discreetly stab at the itching beneath their wigs. These weren't accessories. They were survival tools. The court had rules for everything, including how to scratch in polite company because everyone was infested and no one talked about it. They couldn't. They were royalty and royalty never itches. 4. Venetian Ceruse, the silent killer. 4. Venetian Susi, the silent killer. Of all the tragic weapons in the arsenal of royal beauty, nothing came close to Venetian Susi. It looked innocent enough, just a soft white paste, vinegar, and powdered white lead. But this wasn't makeup. It was a mask of death. And nearly every royal woman in Europe wore it like armor. They applied it daily, not lightly, not sparingly. Thickly, over and over, day after day. Week after week. No washing, no removal. Just another layer. The result, their faces became heavy slabs of poison. This wasn't for galas or portraits. It was for everyday life. Morning audiences, afternoon teas, evening prayers. From the moment they woke to the moment they collapsed into lice ridden bedding, that toxic mask stayed in place. And over time, the weight began to tell. Some queens developed such thick coatings of Susi that they complained of headaches and neck pain. Wigs were added to hide bald spots from lead-induced hair loss. And these wigs, massive, elaborate constructions, only added to the physical burden. Walking became a chore. Sitting for long stretches nearly impossible. But it wasn't just the body that broke. It was the mind. Lid poisoning creeps in like fog. It dulls the senses. It erudices memory. It creates suspicion where none is needed. Turns whispers into insults. Shadows into threats. Courtiers began to notice. The queen's temper ran hot. She forgot entire conversations. She wept over imagined betrayals. None of them guessed the truth. Their sovereigns were dying from the very Routines meant to make them beautiful. And the worst part, they couldn't stop. Because to stop, to let the cracks show, was to fall. Royalty was about $100,000. Power was pale. Authority was flawless. Even as their bodies rotted beneath the surface, they doubled down. More paste. More powder, more poison until nothing human remained. 5. Lice in the palace, a delicate itch. 5 lice in the palace, a delicate itch. Let's return for a moment to the court of King James II. He wasn't a solitary case. His filth was the standard, not the exception. By the 17th century, lice infestations weren't just expected. They were built into court etiquette. You wore layers of fabric heavy with embroidery. You sat on cushions that had never been washed. You brushed against curtains that hadn't been cleaned in a decade. And everywhere, lice in the seams of the seams, on people, on pets, on polished thrones. Women's hairstyles, in particular, were perfect havens for vermin. Fashion demanded towering hair. Sculptures, combed, curled, stuffed with pads, greased with bear or ox fat, then powdered. These were feats of engineering that could take half a day to construct, and they were left untouched for weeks. They became warm, moist, greasy caverns. The ideal breeding grounds for lice, fleas, ticks, and worse. To cope, ladies of the court carried ornate tools, silver sticks with tiny claws. These weren't decorative. They were scratching instruments designed to slip between curls and padding to provide some small measure of relief. Imagine the reality. You're at a royal banquet. The air thick with the perfume of amber grease and spoiled meat. The conversation flows. Harpsichords play. And you are discreetly reaching into your own hair with a clawed stick, trying to relieve the maddening itch of a flea bite just above your left ear. You look serene, but your scalp is a battlefield and everyone else at the table fighting the same war. 6. Perfume. 6. Perfume as armor. As armor. When we imagine queens of the Renaissance, we often picture them cloaked in luxury, jewels, silks, and the rich fragrance of exotic perfumes. And yes, the scent was real. But the reason for it, far from romantic. Perfume wasn't elegance. It was defense. A chemical shield against the stench of human decay. At Versailles, home to over 10,000 nobles, staff, and military officers, the smell was apocalyptic. There were no proper toilets. People relieved themselves behind curtains in stairwells, even during ceremonies. Waste ran down walls. Chamber pots were emptied out of windows, and the stink lingered. So, the court adapted. Noble women carried scent sachets to press against their noses. Not accessories, survival gear. Gloves were doused in musk. Hair was soaked in rose oil. Dresses were stitched with pockets of amber and civet. Jewelry held tiny capsules of wax infused with scent, melting slowly with body heat. But here's the kicker. Perfume over filth doesn't erase odor. It mixes with it. Imagine the clash. The sugary rot of spoiled milk layered with violet Human. Sweat and pus colliding with jasmine. Amber grease masking the scent of infected teeth. The result? A miasma. Thick enough to taste. Visitors to court often fell ill. Nausea, headaches, even respiratory distress. But no one dared question it. To complain was to admit weakness. To recoil was to insult a monarch. So they smiled and inhaled. Perfume became political. The kind you wore, how much you used, how often you reapplied, it all sent messages. Some scents signaled power. Others betrayal. Lovers communicated through fragrance. Enemies did too. And if you couldn't afford enough perfume, you were marked. Socially exiled by scent alone. In a world where bathing was dangerous and so heretical, smell became the dividing line between nobility and obscurity. 7. The groom of the stool hell. 7. The groom of the stool. Here's a story you won't believe, but it's absolutely true. In medieval England, one of the most powerful men in the kingdom didn't wear armor or command troops. He cleaned the king's bottom. His official title, groom of the stool. His job to carry the king's personal toilet, a portable wooden box lined with velvet, and assist with every aspect of the king's bowel movements. That meant cleaning him. That meant inspecting his waist. That meant offering conversation and political advice while kneeling behind him in the most undignified position imaginable. And here's the disturbing twist. This wasn't a lowly job. It was an honor. The groom of the stool had unrivaled access. He was present during the king's most vulnerable moments. He heard the secrets whispered between grunts. He knew when the king was unwell before the physicians did. He could speak plainly to the monarch when others couldn't. He became a confidant, a strategist, a shadow ruler. But consider the reality. The king rarely bathed. His body was riddled with infections. His diet was bloated with meat and wine. His waist was foul beyond imagining. And every day the groom knelt behind him, cleaning wounds, wiping excrement, inhaling the royal stench with practiced indifference. This wasn't a moment. It was a career. These men trained in medical observation. They developed specialized tools. They tracked the king's digestion like a science. Some even inherited the role. Fathers passing down stool cleaning techniques to their sons. And yet, despite the grotesque nature of the work, these men were elevated to the highest levels of court. Because in a world where power was everything, proximity was the ultimate currency, and no one was closer than the man who wiped the king's rear. 8. The Inquisition against soap. 8. The Inquisition against soap. Imagine a world where taking a bath could get you killed. Welcome to 15th century Spain, where Queen Isabella of Castile helped turn soap into heresy. The idea was rooted in twisted theology. Suffering was sacred. If your body writhed, if it itched, festered, and burned, that meant you were spiritually aligned with Christ's suffering. Cleanliness, on the other hand, vanity. Hedonism, a slippery slope toward sin. So, bathing was banned. not just frowned upon, outlawed. Muslims in Spain had long embraced bathing as a daily religious and hygienic practice. But when the Spanish crown launched its brutal campaign of religious conversion and conquest, they didn't just target beliefs. They targeted cleanliness itself. Bathhouses were demolished. Soap makers were arrested. Washing your body became a secretive, dangerous act. Inquisitors began to look for signs. Wet floors, clean fingernails, fresh clothing. Suspicious neighbors would report someone who smelled too fresh. Entire families were dragged into court, accused not of heresy and thought, but of heresy and hygiene. And if you were found guilty, you were burned alive. When Spain conquered Granada, they destroyed centuries of Islamic infrastructure. Public baths, aqueducts, cleansing rituals. They didn't stop there. They took the war on hygiene across the sea, to the Caribbean, to Mexico, to the Philippines. When explorers under Isabella's rule reported that indigenous peoples bathed daily, she was appalled. Her response: command them to stop at once. So the Taino and Arawak, who had bathed in clean rivers for generations, were forced to adopt the filth of Europe. Disease spread like wildfire, not because of swords or ships, but because of dirt. Hygiene became a weapon of empire, a tool of forced conversion, a sign of loyalty, and in time, a racial marker. Spanish nobles began to trace family trees, not just by bloodline, but by cleanliness. If your ancestors bathed too much, you were suspect. This wasn't about germs. They didn't understand germs. It was about control. Soap became rebellion. Dirt became virtue. And the world paid the price. 9. The Countess in Milk. 9. The Countess in Milk. It's a chilly morning in 18th century Hanover. In an ornate chamber, Countess Platen lies submerged in a warm bath of milk. Not a luxury, a treatment. Her body is ravaged by disease, likely syphilis. Open sores burn across her skin. Her breath stinks of rotting tissue. Her fingernails are blackened. Her nerves are on fire. The milk bath is her only relief, a soothing embrace for flesh that feels like it's melting. But the tragedy doesn't stop there. When she's done, when her diseased body has steeped in that tub of milk for an hour, she doesn't dump it. She doesn't destroy it. She donates it to the poor. This wasn't uncommon. It was considered an act of charity. The noble woman offers her bath water, still warm, still rich, with cream and honey, as a gift to starving families. And they accept it gratefully, because they don't know. They don't know that the milk is now teeming with disease, with blood, with pus, with bacteria from a noble woman's wounds. To them, it's a miracle, a gift from God. To us, it's a horror story. And it happened again and again. Diseased nobles shared food, clothes, communion, wine. Their generosity was a vector for plague. Their kindness a quiet execution. They never meant to do harm. But they did, because they lived in a world where their bodies, no matter how sick, were seen as above consequence, and where the poor, no matter how vulnerable, were disposable. 10. Hair, the crown of horror. 10. Hair. The crown of horror. Nowhere was the madness more vivid than in a queen's hair. These weren't hairstyles. They were monuments. Towers. Sculptures. Of silk and wire and powdered bone dust. Held together with fat scraped from dead animals and sculpted into place over 6 to 8 hours by teams of servants. These were hairstyles you didn't undo. You wore them for weeks. Underneath a nightmare. The scalp, unwashed and suffocating under layers of rancid bear grease, became a paradise for lice, fleas, ticks, even worms. They laid eggs in the fat, died in the powder, were born again in the warmth of the queen's flesh. The smell was unimaginable. Animal fat gone. Sour, dead skin rot. Every step released. Tiny clouds of powder infused with decay. But these women, these queens, duchesses, and countesses couldn't scratch, couldn't complain. So they smiled through it. They carried long ivory sticks tipped with claws, hidden in sleeves, used to probe the hairline for relief. A quick scratch here, a gentle stab there, always discreet, always elegant. Their heads became full ecosystems, cradle to predator and prey, rot and renewal. Some women lost their hair permanently. Others developed infections so severe they wept silently during court ceremonies. But no one stopped, because to stop was to fall behind, to be seen as weak, to lose your place in the niche of royal fashion. Even your scalp became a battlefield. 11. Versailles, the golden latrine. 11. Versailles, the golden latrine. At its peak, Versailles housed over 10,000 people, nobles, servants, soldiers, but it had no working toilets. Let that sink in. Men peed off balconies. Women squatted in corners. Chamber pots overflowed. Waste was dumped out of windows. It ran in the halls. It soaked into carpets. And still ambassadors came to marvel. They came to see civilization. Refinement, the Sun King's grand experiment. They left gagging. Even Queen Marie Antoinette wasn't safe. She once walked through an inner courtyard and was hit by human waste thrown from a window above. It landed on her gown. No one apologized. It was Versailles. Waste seeped through floors. Pipe leaks. Poisoned kitchens. Dining rooms wire of sewage. Yet banquets continued. Balls raged into the night. Courters danced, while surrounded by a stench that could stop a clock. Children played in corridors slick with urine. And everyone pretended it was normal. Because Versailles was meant to represent the pinnacle of civilization. To admit the filth was to shatter the illusion. So they didn't. They coped. They adapted. They developed secret codes for where to walk, hand signals for where not to sit, strategies for avoiding the worst smells. Women's dresses doubled as mobile waste absorbers, layers of fabric masking, where they relieved themselves mid-conversation. Etiquette evolved. You learned how to relieve yourself discreetly during royal events, how to stand upwind, how to breathe through your mouth while remaining composed. The palace became a theater of denial. A grand stage upon which human decay played every role. The final curtain. We, the final curtain, like to imagine royalty as beautiful, refined, superior. But the truth is filthier, more grotesque, more human. These were women poisoned by paint. Men scratching themselves bloody beneath silks. Children raised in golden toilets. Whole dynasties itching, stinking, rotting from within, trapped in traditions that valued appearance above everything. And yet they endured. They ruled nations. They wrote laws. They shaped history while suffering in silence, holding their heads high beneath crowns that hid open sures and writhing lice. So next time you see a royal portrait, smooth skin, powdered wig, a smile frozen in time, remember the truth. That beauty came with pain. That power came with rot. And that behind every crown was a human being slowly decomposing under the weight of their own legend.